I've seen dead bodies before, but that day was the first time I actually saw dismemberment.
2 months later, we had another case now. We knew we had another body.
Then another victim later on.
The cut marks were similar in all three victims.
It took what somebody could do to a human body to a new level.
We knew we had somebody that was dangerous.
I don't think he was going to stop. I don't think he was going to stop at all.
It's a quiet morning in the tiny rural community of Burlington County, New Jersey, 2 hours south of New York City.
Workers were actually taking the garbage cans along roadside on Route 72. One of the workers noticed the bag. When he picked it up, it had some weight to it, and he noticed some blood on the bag. When they opened the bag, they discovered a human head. They called us immediately. When I arrived at the scene, first thing you could see, there was a head in the bag. There was blood on the face, and he had like white or gray hair, I remember. His eyes were open. I've seen dead bodies before, but that day was the first time I actually saw dismemberment. There was an upper torso discovered, a left and a right arm, and one of the bags contained intestines. We discovered the lower torso was missing. Both his legs and his lower torso are not at the scene with his upper torso.
Then police get a second panicked call from highway workers 15 miles down the road.
323 to 584.
Authorities do not know if they're responding to a call for the remaining body parts or another murder.
So we went out to the Stafford Forge area, and in the garbage can there was the same bags. Inside the bag, you could see a severed leg. All the trash bags were double bagged, double knotted.
Authorities transport the bags from the two gruesome crime scenes to the state medical examiner's office in Newark.
In the bags, we also found a briefcase, a pair of Bostonian shoes, and a wallet. The wallet belonged to Mr. Thomas Mulcahy. As soon as we had Mr. Mulcahy identified, you have to make a notification to next of kin.
Thomas Mulcahy was a technology salesman who lived in Sudbury, Massachusetts.
We spoke to his family. We learned that Mr. Mulcahy was married. He had 4 children. He was 57 years old at the time of his death, and he was in New York City on a business conference. We actually tracked his movements through New York City on his credit card. We were able to actually see where he went. We found out that he had dinner at the Townhouse Bar in Manhattan.
The Townhouse Bar is a piano bar, a predominantly gay piano bar in Manhattan on the East Side. Upscale, it would be like doctors and lawyers and business guys.
Mrs. Mulcahy, she had thoughts and suspicion that he may have been bisexual. At one point, she found some matches from an all-male nightclub in New York City in his pants pocket. The fact that Mr. Mulcahy was married and had 4 children, and he would frequent these gay bars, is something that we really looked at due to the fact that Mr. Mulcahy may be living 2 different lifestyles at that point.
Then, 10 months later, some unusual trash catches a local resident's eye.
Out of curiosity, he looks in the bag and sees a human leg. He immediately contacted the authorities. As soon as I walked up to the scene, I was at least 100, 200 feet away. First thing I remember is being able to smell decomposition. We did searches around the scene, the area. There was an additional 6 bags. In the bags were body parts. One contained the head, Others contained arms, legs, upper and lower torso. My fellow detectives had been to the prior scene involving Mulcahy. They were aware that he had been also dismembered. That doesn't happen all the time, where it's that similar.
Both cases had the same mark. Both bodies were dismembered into 7 pieces. Both bodies were bagged in similar type bags.
I worked homicide my whole career. It's close to 40 years. But to cut somebody up like that, it's horrendous. It's horrific. We knew we had somebody that was dangerous, that this was not the first time. We knew we had a serious serial killer.
It was probably one of the most heinous crimes I'd ever seen, with the dismemberments and the way that the body was disposed. And it took what somebody could do to a human body to a new level.
At this point, we didn't know why this occurred. We knew we had to find this guy.
Now you have a pattern. With the first victim, it was really unclear. Was this a frenzy? Was this disorganized? Was it a calling card? But now that you have a second victim disposed of in almost exactly the same manner, you know that this is intentional. If this were just a dismemberment, the odds would be very good that the cutting of the body was simply a practical measure to get rid of it. But when you're looking at a disarticulation, somebody who takes the time to insert a knife into a joint and crack the bones in a particular way, for the killer to take the body apart in a very ritualistic fashion, it is serving a very specific personal need that they have. Some serial killers, they have a ritual in mind that they expect to carry out on their victim. Mark. He was unable to refrain from this methodical putting in the bags, double knotting the bags. The disposal is the mark for this particular killer. The killer is leaving the body parts where they will be found, thumbing their nose at the police and basically saying, "You can't find me."
Less than 3 months after the discovery of Anthony Marrero's body, police get another disturbing call 2 hours north.
2 months later, a hot dog vendor pulls off onto a scenic lookout. In the barrel, he notices a green plastic bag. It's tied in a knot. On the bag, he sees what looks like blood. He untied the plastic bag. Inside was a white plastic bag, which had a body part in it. There are 7 body parts that have been severed, placed in plastic bags, similar to Mulcahy and Marrero.
The dismemberment, the double knotted bags, it's the same exact marks for a third time.
The victim is a man named Michael Zaccaro, who's approximately 52 years old.
No fingerprints were recovered from the body, nor the bags. We started to interview and talk to people that knew him. We found out that Mr. Zaccaro would frequent the Five Oaks piano bar every night after work.
Every night around 9:30, Michael Zaccaro would come down and sit at his favorite bar stool until the end of the evening, which was 4 a.m. Michael was a very tall, big man, and he was very regal in the way he walked. He was dignified and, you know, a gentleman. Mike was kind of our Norm from Cheers at the Five Oaks. He would introduce other people to each other. I mean, he was like the social director at this little bar, and get people up to sing. He'd get up and sing. It was around 3 in the morning. I saw this other person sit next to Michael. I had never seen the guy before, but Michael just started talking to him, and the fact that the guy came and sat right next to him, I thought, well, he must know him, because who would just go sit right next to a person when there's a whole bar empty? Michael introduced me to this man as Mark or John, some common name, and said he was a nurse at St. Vincent's. And I believe that The manager told me the next day that he had gotten a ride with this fellow, and I never saw him again after that.
It was a big deal because it would have helped them with the disarticulation of bodies, knowing human anatomy. It was important to us to investigate.
The detectives had me do a composite of the man that was sitting next to Michael that night.
The bartender describes a gentleman came in as a white male in his early 50s with light brown hair, and he's medium build.
We were able to distribute that to the media, that composite sketch, and it made all of the newspapers. It was a big deal in Manhattan. It made the New York Times, and it was being talked about. The media nicknamed him the last call killer because he would be at the bar at the end of the night when last call was happening, and he would be targeting people at the bar very late at night because they would be more vulnerable.
After a period of 6 years, some advances have been made in the Fingerprint Society.
There's been new technology developed that we wanted to submit for analysis to see if we can identify the perpetrator.
There was a new process that was able to lift older fingerprints off of surfaces such as plastic bags. Being that this is a new technology, which we didn't really have that much of in the United States, the Toronto police agreed to assist us. We actually took the thank you bag and another white plastic bag and physically drove them to Canada. We don't usually do this type of thing, but when you have a case that's this intense and you really have to find out what's happening, it was that important. They tested the plastic garbage bags from Thomas Mulcahy. The results of this examination with the new system produced 17 fingerprints. We compared to the fingerprints that were found in the Marrero case, and we found that we had the same person. We have now linked 2 of the murders together.
The prints had matched 2 of our cases, but we still didn't know who they belonged to. We send the prints to all 50 states to see if they match. The state of Maine went online in 1999 for automated fingerprint identification system.
On May 14th, 2001, a fingerprint examiner from the state of Maine announces they have a match.
The fingerprints came back to a person by the name of Richard Rogers.
Our investigators actually went to the Five Oaks bar and showed a picture of Richard Rogers to the bartender.
They had showed me pictures through the years of all these men, but finally, when they came with this one sheet of pictures, and I said, that's him.
In an attempt to learn more about Rogers' past, investigators tracked down his college roommate to see what information he might have about the alleged serial killer.
The guy I knew he wouldn't have hurt that cockroach that was on his suitcase. You know, he was so mild-mannered, and he didn't speak, and he was always very well-dressed. Richard's closet kind of looked like a Marine's closet. It was all lined up with sports coats, and then all the pants were hanging on hangers, and then all the shirts were after that. I left, he and I parted ways, and he became friends with a new roommate. They were attached at the hip. Everyone suspected that, he and his roommate were, probably gay.
One of the most fascinating things to me is that in the 70s, when he was in college, he killed his roommate. The victim's name was Frederick Spencer. Richard Rogers had told authorities that the victim had made a pass at him, and he did not want that. He told police the victim came at him with a hammer.
Although Rogers was found not guilty of that murder, Maine law stipulated that his prints remain on file, which eventually leads investigators to him.
It was like Christmas, and it was like, we got this guy, we really got him.
Richard Rogers was living on Staten Island, very close to the stores where the rubber gloves and the saw were purchased.
He was a surgical nurse, so he knew how to decapitate an individual with the least amount of resistance. In other words, knowing exactly where to saw.
So all this time, the task force is looking for a male nurse that works at St. Vincent's Hospital. Meanwhile, Richard Rogers never worked at St. Vincent's Hospital, and it appears that he lied to Michael Sequeira about where he worked. Investigators obtained Richard Rogers' work records and discovered that for each date of each murder, Richard Rogers was off from work.
Just after midnight on May 28, 2001, they tell him they're investigating a homicide of 4 gay men out of New York City. The detectives advised him that there was evidence to trace back to Staten Island. And as well as him being the last person to be seen with Michael Sequeira, he had been sitting with his hands on his knees and his feet on the floor. Once he was confronted, he then changed to a defensive posture. He started sweating. He was acting extremely nervous and worried.
Rogers admits to knowing victim Michael Sequeira. He then asks for a lawyer.
He didn't make any admission in regards to the homicides.
Without a confession, investigators decide to search Rogers' home in hopes of finding evidence that will link him to the murders.
We secured a search warrant for the residence of Richard Rogers. I gotta say, that was probably the neatest, cleanest residence I've been in. He actually vacuumed in rows. You look back on the case, everything was clean. All the cuts were clean, disarticulated. The body was drained of all blood. Things were starting to come together. We found the same shopping bags we found with Thomas Mulcahy's body parts in it. We did come across some sedatives. We did believe that Rogers was giving these sedatives to individuals he brings back to his house, either knock them out or render them to the point where he can, overcome them in his bedroom. We opened up a drawer and we saw some photographs. As soon as we looked at them, everyone was in a state of shock because he was taking pictures from his apartment out the window of these construction workers out there with no shirts on. And he actually wrote what looked like stab wounds with blood, drops of blood on them.
Based on what police have found, the DA charges Rogers with 2 counts of first-degree murder.
October 2005. At the Ocean County Justice Complex in Toms River, New Jersey, the trial of Richard Rogers begins. He was looking at multiple life sentences. The task force came to an agreement that the Mulcahy and Marrero cases were the strongest of the cases because of the fingerprint evidence and the similarity in the disposing of the body.
Prosecutors build a case around the killer's distinct mark, Rogers' job as a surgical nurse, and the violent photos found at his home. The defense calls no witnesses. Rogers declines to testify on his own behalf.
He never talked. He never confessed.
After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury reaches a verdict.
We were all nervous. The jury looked very upset. I think I saw at least one juror crying, and I didn't know what to make of that. And it had me very worried that they thought they had to acquit him. And then we heard them say that the verdict was guilty. Guilty of both murders. Guilty on all counts. All the air went out of me. I was very relieved and very satisfied for the families. It was a very, very emotional moment for everyone.
On January 27, 2006, the New Jersey Superior Court judge requires that Richard Rogers serve all sentences consecutively. Rogers, at 55 years old, will have to serve a minimum of 65 years before he is eligible for parole.
With consecutive life sentences, there really is no possibility to ever be released.